Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our sort of weekly River Guide professionalism series. This week, I am so stoked to have Jim Coffey as our esteemed guest and speaker. And this is a thing we do try to do every week to sort of share professionalism in river guiding, share topics from professionals for professionals. And Jim is the consummate river professional. I mean, in my opinion, my knowing about him, maybe the best guide in the world, or definitely one of them. And I first heard of Jim through his NRS safety series, Rescue for River Runners. That's where I first saw him on YouTube. And since then, I've learned more about him and really learned a lot about him through Barry Cruz's Leading Steep podcast, which I'll put a note down below because if you like Jim, which you will, you'll want to hear this episode of Barry's podcast. And today, Jim's going to talk to us about what to carry and how to carry it. And we'll do questions at the end. So if you have questions, put them in the comments, or we'll just do question and answer at the end. But with that, I'm gonna give it to Jim.
Thanks, Zach. That's a lovely introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak and share a little bit of experience through my background and through a combination of the programs and businesses that I run. One, which is a whitewater rafting company called the Spree, which also runs canoeing and kayaking programs in Mexico and Costa Rica, as well as a school to train people to become professional guides. So the thought with my talk today was to kind of go back to basics, but also look at, we're living in a slightly new world coming out of the COVID world, and try and think about what we can carry with us, what we should carry, how we would carry it, either on our person, in our hard boat, in our canoe or our kayak, if that's what we happen to be leading, and then we might carry with us in a raft if we have the opportunity to bring a bit more with us, so that in the event that we were to have an incident or accident of some sort, that we'd be able to deal with that in the best way possible. So that's my topic for today. So I'm pretty stoked. I'm speaking to you from my garden under a mango tree in Veracruz, Mexico. So I just got off the river teaching a part of a kayaking program. So still a little bit dripping wet. So excited to get back and just show you a little bit about what I carry on myself, what I carry in my canoe or kayak, and what I carry in my raft. So if there's anyone who has any questions or any other thoughts or additions, love to see some comments in the chat, and I'll see what I can do to try to be able to help answer those. So first thing, I've got my PFD on. Ooh, let's see, ta-da, my PFD on. My PFD has a rescue harness as well as a rescue tether on it. Those are all things that are talked about in swiftwater rescue classes. So I'm going to go back a little bit and just talk about some of the basics that I might carry on my person. And some of the classics that we may have with us is I think it's important that guides carry a knife with them. With carrying a knife, you never know who or when you're going to use that as a tool to potentially save someone's life. What I do know, though, is that the most likely person that you're going to use that tool to save someone's life is probably going to be yourself. So as a guide, you want something which is going to be easy to access. So I prefer to have it on the outside of my jacket. So here I have it zip tied to the shoulder strap of my jacket. Some people prefer a folding knife and they stick it in their pocket. You can make that decision based on the type of paddling that you do and your thoughts on how often that you may end up using it. But for me, I think of my knife as a life-saving tool that I might need as quickly as possible to save myself. So the knife that I use is called a bear claw. One of the things cool about a bear claw is that the serrated edge here is very, very sharp, and it's really designed to cut through rope or webbing, which is one of my biggest concerns as far as being entrapped in something goes. It has a little hole here for my finger to go through, so it makes it easy, especially if my hands are cold, living and working in Canada, to be able to hold onto it. And the serrated edge, as I mentioned, is quite sharp. It has a reasonable sheath. I must admit I've lost my fair share of them as well, but it stays in there. And you'll notice that when I have this in the sheath, this is on my right shoulder. And the fact that I'm left-handed means I would prefer to have it on my left shoulder, but the way that that way I can reach across to grab it, I do carry this on my right shoulder because of the shape of the sheath, that when I pull this out, that the serrated edges are pointing away from my neck. Whereas if this was over on this side here, and I pull this down, I don't want to pull this down and have those serrated edges so close to my neck because it is very sharp. It's designed to shear and tear, and I don't want to have that happen, you know, to myself, to my neck. So I have this over on the right-hand side, up on my shoulder. It's nice and tight, tucked into my PFD, and I just have an extra little loop to keep that bottom end secured. Many people with their knives might have a long tether that might be on bungee cord or elastic, and that's okay if that's your thing and you find that it works for you. But one of the things that we have found when people have that elastic style tether here, which they often will loop up over the top of the knife, is that if you pull down and then you don't have positive control over the bungee, that sort of sends your knife up this way and potentially could get in and around your eye area. And on a swiftwater rescue class years ago, I was told of an incident where someone had sort of a bungee cord looped up over the top, someone hit their knife, it came down and then bungeed up in towards them. So we obviously don't want that to happen to anybody. So there are many different types of knives available. This is an affordable knife. It's available in many different locations. You can order it online. It'll be shipped out to you. If you lose it, it's not the end of the world to purchase another one. And I think that having a knife on your person, whether it's in your pocket or on your PFD, is really a professional guide essential. If you don't have a knife, you shouldn't be carrying a rope. If you're a professional guide, you need to be carrying a rope. So that combination really says, I have to have a good quality knife. Where am I going to put it? I have it on my shoulder where it's accessible. And even if I couldn't get at it, let's say I was pinned in my kayak, then maybe someone else would be able to get at my knife to be able to help cut me out of that situation. Next up, I'm going to open up this pocket. I like PFDs, which have lots of pockets. This is a Spanish design PFD called Ape, where they'll actually custom design the jacket for you. So there's a bunch of fun custom things that I have added into this one. In this pocket here, I carry my whistle. And I could tether my whistle to myself. Sometimes pockets will have a, you know, like this here, a little area that I can tie that to. And I think that's fine. What I don't really like is I don't like having my whistle dangling off of my PFD here, let's say dangling off my shoulder on some type of tether. Years ago, some rafting guides used to drill a hole through their helmet, not recommended, and have their whistle up here that they could then pull it down to their mouth and then pull a string and send it back up there. It was kind of this crazy whistle floss type way to carry their whistle. What I don't like about having this on the outside of my jacket, especially if it's attached with a piece of cord, is I don't want this to get snagged on something and then suddenly be attached to something by this little piece of cord and my snagged whistle. So when I want access to my whistle, I just open up my pocket, I grab my whistle and go ahead and do my thing. And there's a series of different whistle signals or commands that we use. And in my operation, we train our guides to be rather whistle conservative so that we're not hearing all these whistles all the time, that when we do hear a whistle, that we know we have a true, legitimate emergency of some sort. So there's my whistle, okay? So those are two very basic things that I would carry on my person. When I go beyond that, I start thinking about, okay, what are some of the other things that might go wrong on the trip that I'm on? So on the Ottawa River, for example, the Ottawa River, which is my main home river, I would say, in Eastern Canada, is a big volume river, which only has like 2 rocks in it, right, that you could possibly get stuck on. And so many people don't really think too much about carrying equipment for wrapping or pinning on a river like the Ottawa because there just isn't very much opportunity for that. However, I also work on a series of different rivers all around the world, particularly in Mexico and Costa Rica, where the rivers are long and rocky and continuous. And on those long, rocky, continuous rivers, I know that there's a likelihood of my canoe or kayak getting pinned, that my raft could get pinned or wrapped. So I want to carry a basic amount of rescue equipment. And I could carry that rescue equipment in a small dry bag and maybe put that in the back of my boat, or I could put it in a bigger bag or barrel in my raft. But to be honest, for me, I like to carry that equipment on my person, because I never want to be in that position where I'm thinking, okay, today am I going to need my rescue gear? Well, who knows whether you're going to need your rescue gear, right? It's a rescue, right? It comes up by surprise. So I just like to have that stuff on me. And it doesn't matter where I am in the world or who I happen to be working with. I don't need to rely on anybody else. I've got some basic equipment on my person. And that equipment is, I have listed, it's easy to remember, as 4, 3, 2, 1. And 4 is 4 locking gate carabiners. 3 is 3 pulleys. 2 is 2 prusik cords or short cords to make a camming device or a prusik. And 1 piece of webbing, which is typically tubular webbing, 5 meters or about 15 feet in length. So to go through some of those things, my 4, 3, 2, 1, as far as carabiners go, I try to make my carabiners multifunctional. So I would include this carabiner here, which is on my on my rescue tether, that when I pull this out through this D-ring, here I've got one carabiner, and this carabiner is a twist lock. So it means that I never end up forgetting and leaving it open where it could possibly attach onto something. So here, this is 2 phases. I roll it and I open it. So there's 1. I'll have another one of those carabiners on my piece of webbing. You'll see here, I'll just sort of move up a little bit, that I have a waist-worn belt system for my throw bag. And this is on a quick release, so I can pop this and get access to my entire kit. While I'm wearing it, I just have to open up this buckle here and pull out my throw bag, okay? Or I dig into this pocket here and pull out a piece of webbing. So with this, I get a second carabiner, okay? At the bottom of my throw bag, I have a little pocket where I get a third carabiner, and I have one more carabiner here hanging in my PFD pocket, and it's secured. So there's my 4 locking gate carabiners. So I'm not just putting 4 in my pocket and never using them. These are all sort of in use all the time, okay? So 4 locking gate carabiners. I want to speak a little bit about the difference between, I'll just get this out here. Between having a screw gate and one of these auto lockers. So screw gates are good, nothing wrong with them. Here, I'll roll this up until it is closed. Then I can just roll it back slightly. I don't need to crank this really tight and just have it like that. And now it's closed, and very quickly, now it's open, okay? With here, the other one, which is the twist lock, I carry a twist lock on my piece of webbing because although my preference is to carry the webbing in the pocket of my rescue belt system, some people will wear this around their waist. So they're going to wrap it around their body a couple of laps and join this together in front of them. One of the things that's problematic with that is that we need to make sure that this carabiner is always locked, because if we've fallen out of, let's say, a raft and we try to climb back in, there's a possibility that as we climb up over the perimeter line on the raft, that this carabiner could hook onto the perimeter line on the boat, and now that person can neither get back into the raft nor can they fall back into the water. As they're suspended on the perimeter line, it's difficult to be able to get this carabiner off. So that's why I recommend, if you're going to wear it on your body, that use a locking carabiner, and preferably one which is an auto locker, whereas in other applications, just a regular screw gate would be fine. Okay, so 4 locking gate carabiners is the first thing that I have on my person. Secondly, I'm going to reach into one of my pockets just off to the side here, Oops. And I'll pull out the content. And here I've got some pulleys, okay? I've got 3 of them. Well, I'll explain the reason why 3 in a second, but now I don't have to worry about going to another raft, or if I'm working with different companies, do they carry rescue gear or they don't carry rescue gear? Who's responsible for it? I just like to have my own stuff so that if I need it, it's there and readily available for me. So I have 3 of those in my PFD. I don't need to worry, oh, is this a river that I expect to get wrapped or pinned on today? Should I bring my rescue equipment or not? It always just comes with me. Next up, in my other pocket, over on the side here, I have a couple of prussiks. For those who've taken swiftwater rescue training, our prussiks are used to be able to grip on to other ropes. And typically, these are called hollow block. You'll notice that they're a slightly different length. There's some advantage of being able to use a short one in one location or a longer one in another location. So I have one of each size. And again, I don't even notice that I'm carrying these. They're in the pocket of my PFD. Whenever I need them, I have them available to quickly pull out. But if I'm paddling, they don't bother me. If I'm trying to get back in the raft, they don't bother me. It's just something that I carry on my person, so it's there in the event that I need it. The same would go for my piece of webbing. Often with my piece of webbing, I could use it to, let's say, make an anchor in the event that I were to have a boat wrapped or pinned, or if I needed to make a field expedient harness, I could make a harness out of my piece of webbing. If, let's say, I had to access someone by going down towards them, or being able to go to work my way up a rope, let's say up a steep bank. And to add to my 4-3-2-1, I'd have a high quality throw bag. And this has been replaced, the rope that was originally in here, I've replaced that rope with a canyoneering rope. And this, to me, is somewhat ideal because it's a type of rope that I can use not just for throwing to someone, let's say a swimmer who's fallen out of their craft, or for a mechanical advantage system of sorts. This is a high enough quality rope that if I needed to, let's say, set up a rappel to get down to someone, or some type of raising system to get someone up out of a canyon, that this would be the type of rope I would like to use, as opposed to sort of your standard throw bag rope. You know, so high quality rope, 4 locking gate carabiners, 3 pulleys, 2 prussiks, 1 piece of webbing, 4-3-2-1. And what that gives me the opportunity to do is to set up sort of what I would call the ideal 3-to-1 mechanical advantage system, often referred to as a Z drag or a Z drag, I guess that. And the reason why we use 4 and 3 is that when we set those systems up, we often finish them off with what we call a change in direction, so that when we're pulling, that we're not standing in the line of fire in the event that something breaks, that we can pull off to the side, and if something breaks, it goes zooming past us back towards the anchor, and we're clear and secure out of the way. If you want to find out more about that, you can check out Rescue for River Runners, and there's a whole video on mechanical advantage in this 4-3-2-1 system. Apart from the usual things that we may carry with us, that might not be much of a surprise, there are a few little hidden extras that I end up carrying with me, and in particular now with COVID, I want to share some of these things. The first one, when I open up my PFD, I carry some protection, some barrier protection from getting some type of transmissible disease or whatever from someone else that I happen to maybe be helping out along the way, doing first aid or whatever. So where that starts for me is that I keep on my person a pair of gloves that I can easily put on if, let's say, someone has cut themselves or hurt themselves, that using some medical gloves provide some barrier protection so I don't get sick touching any of their blood or fluid or any of those things. And I carry a thin, small face shield. And this is a face shield that if for whatever reason I needed to provide rescue breathing for someone, that this is really small. It creates a protective barrier that when I were to provide rescue breathing, that any of the air in their body or bacteria that they have, or if they were carrying the virus now in the days of COVID, that this protects me from from any of their stuff, their gunkiness, whatever that happens to be. okay? So a little bit of barrier protection to start. I know that this is not the best form of barrier protection. It's small and compact, so it's good to carry on my person, but there's some better ones, which I'm going to bring up shortly, shortly in our talk, okay? So barrier protection. Another thing that I'll carry with me, and I do this more and more, is that I do carry my phone with me. And the reason why is that I think it's nice to be able to take some photos. I think it's nice to take some photos if you have an emergency, like someone was just bitten by a snake in Costa Rica. Well, you don't want to try to kill the snake because the snake is, going to be aggressive towards you and not very environmentally sound. But if I can take a picture of the snake, then when I get to the hospital, they'll know what type of antivenin is necessary to be able to use. I also just like taking pictures, right? Perhaps I'll also, on my phone, if I was looking at maybe doing some practice for river rescue or was trying to figure something out, I can go to an app called R3 Rescue for River Runners, and I can look up, okay, here's how I should set up a mechanical advantage system when this boat is pinned. So a couple of things that you can use your phone for. Having a light is important. There's some of these that will take a pulse if you put your finger over the, or some apps that will take a pulse if you put your finger over the camera. So I think there's a lot of usage for your phone, not to mention that many rivers that we're on will either have signal or glimpses of signal. So we have some type of communication device to the bigger and better world. So I carry that with me, and it's in a waterproof case, and I haven't had any problems with my phone leaking. I also will carry with me a asylum stick, a glow stick, and that light stick is important for me, especially when I'm working in countries like Mexico or Costa Rica, where at 6 p.m. it's pitch dark. So if I've messed up my day, I've had some delays getting on the water, we had some wraps or pins or something else like that along the way that's held us up, I want to make sure that I have a light source, not just to be able to guide me to be able to get out, but so that people can see me. And I'll take some duct tape, I'll take that duct tape and I'll put the glow stick right on the top of my helmet. So even if I were in the water from 360 degrees, people will be able to see me to hopefully be able to rescue me. Okay, or rescue the rest of my party if that's something that we need. So this is a cheap, easy to carry, durable light source that doesn't just show me where to go, but it shows other people and calls out, there's our target, there's our person. We're going to rescue those people over there. So a glow stick. Next up, I've got a variety today. I don't normally have this much, but I carry some food in my PFD. And so here I've got a Snickers bar or maybe a Milky Way that doesn't have nuts in it, in case I had an allergy or someone else was cold or cranky, that I could give them some to eat. Sometimes people suffer from what I refer to as hanger, right? They got hungry and angry at the same time. So if someone were in that position, that I could give them some high energy to be able to keep going a little bit more, a little bit of kindling for them to be able to burn as far as their energy reserves go. I also like to carry this primarily for me, because when things go wrong, we have some type of problem on the river, if it's going to take a long time to find a solution to our problem, we don't often have time to sit down and say, okay, time out, let's go and eat, and now let's come back to our problem. When we start running out of fuel, we sometimes get not only this idea of hangry, but we may end up getting what we refer to as the umbles. We might mumble, stumble, fumble, bumble, and grumble. So if I can get some quick, easy to burn energy into me, quickly grab some to eat, continue on with the rescue efforts, get her done, and then once it's all done, we could sit down and have that longer lunch. So I carry a few of these different things in my PFD. I won't have this many tomorrow because I'll be heading out on the river and probably using some of them up. For anyone who works in the tropics, it's important that if you're carrying that stuff in your PFD, make sure at the end of the day that you clean out your wrappers, because even if you hang your PFD up on a line, you'll find that in the tropics, ants will sense where that food wrapper is, and the next thing you know, you'll have a PFD pocket full of fire ants, which is not very comfortable for anybody. When I have all of that stuff on my person, I want to try to keep this front pocket of my PFD as thin and as tight to my body as possible, not puffed right out. That's why I chose that really thin micro shield to carry my PFD as opposed to something, a regular size pocket mask, which is bigger. Often this front pocket is one of the things that can be difficult for some people if they're challenged if they've fallen out getting back into the boat, if their boat is a raft, for example. If you have too much stuff in your front pocket, it's hard to get up and over the tube. So I'll try to keep this as slim a profile as possible, which then just helps me to be able to get back in the raft a little bit more. So a little bit of a recap: gloves, barrier protection, phone, light source, food, a few of the extras that I carry with me. Now, if I were heading out canoeing or kayaking, apart from all of these things that I carry on my person, I'll quite likely carry a dry bag in my boat. Here's a watershed bag that we use as a bag that we carry, which has a couple of different things in it. The first thing that I just want to go over is how to open this up. So there's a bunch of Fastex clips that you end up opening. And then you've got this great sort of plastic zipper, rubber zipper, pretty much, kind of like any type of Ziploc bag. So to be able to open this, unfortunately, a lot of people don't have don't get the instructions right, and they grab one of these tabs and they try and pull apart like this. And in doing so, it's quite likely that you'll pull those tabs off. So a better idea is to stick your fingers into the tabs like this, and then move your hands one forward and one backwards to make an S shape on the zipper, and then it will pull apart and come open. Okay. A few of the things that I might carry in here: I have a first aid kit, which is in the bag. I won't go into the details of the first aid kit right now, but it's pretty much a standard first aid kit for going paddling. I may have a slightly larger style pocket mask. Here, with this mask, I've got a set of gloves tucked in the same container, so it's easy for me to have my barrier protection all together. I, in fact, carry this typically in my PFD. I'm not as concerned about that bulkiness, but it does take up a lot more room in here, but it's definitely a better mask than the micro shield happens to be. From there, I'd also carry, and this is something that's a little bit new for with COVID. We make sure that we've got lots of gloves and mask barrier protection for other people who happen to be within our group. Just missing one more thing here. We also will carry with us in my PFD just a mask that we now use when we're talking to our group, like a non-surgical mask. And I have one which is kind of a neoprene-ish material, so it's good. It doesn't absorb water. We keep that in my pocket. In here, we now also carry a setup of it's called a BVM, a bag, valve, and mask. It's a little bit bulky, but not too bad. And the way that this works is that I pull this out, and it has this section here. So I'm just going to open up, and typically this tube could go to an oxygen tank. We don't carry an oxygen tank with us on the river, but this valve sticks into this mask like this, and now by taking this apparatus and squeezing the bag, I can now use this as opposed to me blowing into someone. And this is a real advantage in the days of COVID. And this is also something good for outfitters to consider adding to their first aid kit, so you're not requiring your staff to breathe for someone who may end up being sick. So the way that this works, and I don't have my mannequin with me, but I do have my friend Eeyore here. And if Eeyore were not breathing like this, and I have him on his back, I can take the BVM and I'm going to grip it with what we call the 3 C, letter C technique. I'm going to put the C around the top, the 3 around his face, pull his head backwards to be able to open up his airway with a head tilt chin lift, and then squeeze the bag once every 5 seconds in lieu of having to give rescue breaths. And this is the way that when I have this and my own personal mask on or gloves on, that I'm most secure to be able to provide support for someone who's, let's say, not breathing on one of our trips. And I'll carry that in my dry bag for when I'm canoeing or kayaking, because sometimes I don't have the opportunity of having a raft nearby. We also carry in our bags some type of communication device. So this is a Garmin InReach device. I have it tethered to my phone so that I can just send text messages or emails with my location to, let's say, my driver or my office for logistics if I have a minor emergency, or I can press the SOS button on the side to then have an emergency team come in to be able to rescue us. These are affordable, in the $300 to $500 range. You have a package that you pay, which can be as cheap as $20 or $30 a month, up to $100 a month, so that you can send different messages. And I think that when you're out in the middle of nowhere and something goes wrong, being able to call for help becomes quite valuable for us. So we carry one of these on all of our expeditions, particularly in our canoeing or kayaking trips, because we can fit them just in our regular watershed dry bag. So there's what we would look at carrying in our canoe or kayak. I'd also carry with me a spare paddle, whether that's a canoe paddle or a kayak paddle. Put this in the back of my boat, and I just don't worry about it. Sometimes if I've got too much in my boat, if I've got my first aid kit and other things like that, I might even just stuff this in the back of one of my guests' boats. They don't even know that it's there, but if we have some type of emergency, we lose or break a paddle, then we can just pull that out and continue on the rest of the way downstream without putting anyone in compromise of having to either hand paddle out, or if you have actual hand paddles, that might be valuable. But if you don't have anything else, losing a paddle could make your day, especially if you're on a challenging section of river, quite problematic. If I was in a raft, I also would carry a pump with me. This is strapped onto my tube here, often referred to as a K-pump. This is just a small pump to be able to top up a boat. Let's say if we had some type of wrap or pin, and for whatever reason I was challenged getting it off, and I decided to adjust the air in one of the compartments of my boat, that would be okay, because afterwards I'd be able to pump back up. I carry a spare paddle, and we also have a large first aid kit. And with that large first aid kit, because a raft is going down the river and there's a lot of space, we try to bring some medical equipment to the field that we might not be able to just carry if we're in any other type of craft, that we're certainly not going to carry on our person or in the back of our canoe or our kayak. So if I open up my big first aid kit here, which is a big blue barrel, again, I've got a lot of barrier protection up at the front, up at the top. So masks, EVM, all my different first aid stuff that I would normally carry or bring with me. Here, instead of an InReach device, I have a satellite phone. Satellite phone is always much better than a messaging device. One, you get to have two-way conversation with someone, and when things really go sideways, it is nice to have that type of two-way conversation. But it's a little bigger and a little bulkier, so harder for me to carry in some of my other crafts. But satellite phone, obviously, if we had some type of issue or problem, is one of the best ways to be able to get that type of help, and be able to communicate two ways is really beneficial. When we communicate, we don't call emergency services directly from the field. We call back to our main office, who then sets up a crisis control center, and they become the main center for communication from the field to them to emergency services, back to them, back to the field again. And that just ends up helping us, that if our calls get dropped along the way, that there's someone that is interpreting, probably who's out in the field and where they're going to go or what they're going to do in the event we have some type of problem with the communication device. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, we also carry in our main kit is that we carry a defibrillator. And this is kind of new and kind of interesting. And I've got a bit of a story which is again, I think beneficial for people to hear in relation to a defibrillator. When people go whitewater rafting, for example, there are a bunch of things that can go wrong, but really the ultimate thing is having someone go non-breathing and pulseless. And they might do that in relation to a drowning, right? They've aspirated water, drowning being suffocation in a liquid. Or what may have happened is that they may have had some type of cardiac problem. And then subsequent to their cardiac problem, that they may have then gone ahead and drowned. When we're whitewater rafting, we take all sorts of people where the barrier of entry, is like $100, right? They're paying to go on this trip. But it's hard for us to know all the different medical issues or problems that people are bringing with them. Our operation has a medical form that everyone needs to fill out. That medical form is filled out by the individual rather than by their doctor. So we hope that they're being honest as they end up, giving us that information. And there are many people who have potential heart conditions, either heart conditions that they know about or heart conditions that they don't even know that they have. So we decided that we would go the extra mile and that we would carry, because we can keep dry, a defibrillator in our boats. And we carry one per trip. Sometimes if there was a company that ran multiple trips in one day, they might have one or two stashed in different areas or prioritize where their defibrillator happens to go. The way that this works is that I open it up, I take out the machine, okay? A few other things that I may carry with me here is maybe some scissors or shears to be able to cut off clothes. We want to strip them down for their whole upper body. We may carry a razor to quickly be able to shave them if they're like a big hairy person, that the pads might not stick well enough to them, or sometimes we'll carry an electric razor with us as well, so we can just shear them down so that we get good contact with the pads. Then all we do is pull down this handle, pull that out.
Begin by removing all clothing from the patient's chest.
And listen to the instructions. So as we listen to the instructions, cut the clothes, remove the clothing, open up this cartridge which has the pads.
Remove, protect.
Which has the pads. Place the pads just as they're set in the diagram. Put them on and listen for the instructions. So in a drowning situation or anything that has to do with water, we want to be able to get that person out of the water, try to get respirations into them, because often people are in respiratory arrest and subsequent to the respiratory arrest in cardiac arrest. So we want to try and breathe for them. If they're pulseless, we want to start CPR. And as soon as we can, we want to strip them down, dry them down, get a defibrillator on them, and then follow the instructions in the machine. And as we follow the instructions of the machine, we'll find that that it's really easy, really simple, easy for anyone to be able to follow. And when we look at this idea of drowning or cardiac arrest on the river, the first link in the chain of survivability is early recognition of the problem. Second is early high quality CPR. Third, and the big jump up to success, is early defibrillation. And fourth is early advanced medical care, where paramedics can push some other drugs to be able to help someone who's in cardiac arrest. So if we're able to not just stop our chain of success after CPR and be able to use a defibrillator, our likelihood of full recuperation is that much higher. And you may just save someone's life by an apparatus that really only costs now about $1,000. They come down in price and down in size, make it easier for us to be able to carry them. And I'm such a big fan of these that I started carrying a defibrillator on our trips sometime around the year, I don't know, maybe slightly after 2000, 2002, 2003. And in 2008, right here in Mexico, on my local river, we ended up having a kayaker go into cardiac arrest, and a bunch of our students on one of our programs defibrillated them on the side of the river, saving his life, and he's still a kayaker today. So that's a little bit of some of the extra stuff that we may end up carrying in our bigger first aid barrel. So to wrap things up, I know that there's a combination of what we're going to carry and how we're going to carry it, some of which is, I think, a guide's responsibility, and other parts which is an outfitter responsibility. And often the best way to figure out which is which is to get together and have a meeting and good open communication to say, okay, the expectation is that all the guides will have this amount of equipment on their person, whether it's a good idea for them to have that for their private paddling or for their professional work. Having a basic amount of equipment is beneficial for us. And then we'll look at seeing, okay, beyond those basics, what does the company want us to be able to use? What will they provide us with? Will they provide us with a phone or a communication device? Will they be able to provide us with some advanced medical equipment, whether that's as simple as a BVM, a bag valve mask, or a defibrillator? And once we're able to piece all of that together, we should realize that when we head out on the river, that we're in a much better situation being prepared in the event that something goes wrong, versus having to react to something without having the tools that we need in the event that we have some type of crisis out, that just ends up happening. So one of the quotes that I like to think, and I think we should end off, or that everyone should think of as we end off here, is that sometimes people will say, oh, what you did or how you made that save or that rescue, that was lucky. My goodness, you guys were lucky you had a defibrillator save on the side of the river in Mexico. What luck. But we have to remember that to a certain degree, we also manufacture our own luck. And that luck is manufactured when preparation collides with opportunity. And those two things come together, we have the likelihood of having good luck. But if we have poor preparation or no preparation, and then an opportunity or something comes up, well, then potentially we have bad luck as opposed to good luck. So the more we can be prepared, the more we can think of, what do I need in the event that this were to happen, and figure out a way to carry it or bring it with us, the better off we're going to be out on the river, whether we're out paddling personally or whether this is part of our profession or profession in the guiding world. So there we go.
Jim, that's so cool. As I was listening to you talk, I was thinking, you have you boat, you have experience and you have the training combined, which I talked to a lot of people who are either have a ton of training and they're espousing all that experience, or people with a lot of experience who don't have the training. I feel like you bring both. And I feel like there's a pyramid with those two things, plus you're a great teacher. And so I'm super appreciative of you sharing like quality information with us, with that teaching experience, which you obviously have, with all that you bring. So thank you so much. I'm really excited. What I want to do is ask you some questions that I wrote down. Hopefully, yeah, thank you. I have a bunch of questions I wrote down, and I want to go through those. Hopefully people have questions in the comments, and then ask you about the WILD program, because I'm super curious about it. So I'm going to try not to take too long with questions.
Sure.
And before I get started, I want to show you, I have one of those same defibrillators. After listening to your story on Barry's podcast, I went out and bought these for all of our trips. And I have to say, like, I looked into these 5 years ago and they were big and bulky and tough, but these new ones are super small and super carryable now. So I have one with me, and we have them for all of our trips now after that podcast. So thank you for that. And then I want to show you one thing you may not have seen. This is have you seen this? The Pocket BVM. This is a bag valve mask.
No, I haven't.
And this is a bag valve mask and the shield in one. And it's in this thing that comes undone and it unfolds into the whole thing. And it's just this big, barely bigger than those masks you were showing. So I can open it up really quick. I bought these for all of our trips too. You put this on them. There's the mask. And then this just unfolds. So this comes out. It's designed for carrying on, minimally. So this is something we're checking out.
Right. Yeah.
So we're going to start bringing on our trips, which I think not everybody learns how to use them. So thank you for the demonstration. on how to actually use those things. 'Cause a lot of people have them or have seen them, but never actually
problem.
used them.
And I normally have a mannequin with me, but instead I had to steal my son's Eeyore bear today, or doggy today.
And same thing. I just bought a mannequin. You know, I realized you can just go to Amazon and buy a mannequin so we can practice. You know, it's not, you know, in the modern era, mannequins aren't that expensive, and you can just go to Amazon and get one. So anyway, I just have a bunch of questions, and if anybody else has them, please add in. The first one is, have you used a river knife in an emergency situation? Can you talk about an example if that's happened?
Yeah, for sure. So, interesting story, actually. In many years ago, I used to work in Australia on a river called the Nimboida River. And after the first rapid on what's usually the second day of one of our trips, the first rapid is called Cod Hole, and the second rapid is called the Waterfall. And this is a 5-day trip. But in Australia, on those longer multi-day trips, they paddle raft as opposed to rowing. And the way that they do that is that they have a frame. And back in the day, you'd load your cargo sort of underneath or on the frame, you'd flip it over, then you'd load on top, and they had a big net that would come up over the top. And you would literally sort of stitch the netting down to hold in all of your gear. And many people back then, before watershed bags and Pelican cases and things, would carry cameras and things like that in an ammunitions box, an old military surplus ammunitions box. And normally those would have two strings, one sort of at the front, one at the back, and that would clip on to the side. So essentially it would be like string, and then box beside it. And what we would typically do, because people needed access to those would stay on the outside of the netting and meshing. And without thinking about it, without realizing that it was going to be problematic, someone had just clipped those 2 strings onto the meshing, and it was there in the event that they wanted access to it. But as someone came through that Cod Hole rapid, their boat flipped, and in that capsize, the 1 in a million things that seems to happen all the time out on the river. That's, you know, one of the adages that I always think of, that, oh, you'll never need to use that. It's like 1 in a million. But those things happen all the time. And there were 5 people in the boat, and 4 popped up, and a friend of mine caught them on a throw bag, and I was the last bag, and we were looking for the 5th person, and we couldn't find them. And it turned out that just by bad luck, as their head was up like this, and the boat was upside down, sort of pushing down the tube on top of them, that they had one of those strings that went in front of their head, one that went behind their head, and the box on the other side of their head. So they were kind of stuck within the confines of the way that ammo cam was rigged. And so they don't rig it like that anymore, but it was one of those weird things. And the following rapid after the Cod Hole rapid is called the Waterfall. And it's not big, but it's a 2-meter waterfall, and it's something that we would normally portage around. And as the boat was moving towards there, I realized that someone dropping over a 2-meter drop, attached to a boat by an ammo can, and all this rope, that they would have broken their neck, the boat would surf, and they would have subsequently have drowned. So the move at the moment was to go in and try and help free them. And the way that we were able to free them was to cut one of the lines to get them away from the boat. And we still went over the waterfall. I swam over the waterfall. He swam over the waterfall. The boat went over the waterfall, but we ended up going down below and shot out, as opposed to him going over the drop and being stuck by his head. So I know that those stories are not that common, but they're common enough. I think that, how many stories like that do you need to hear before you realize that having a $40 knife is worthwhile? One thing which is interesting is that people used to always say, teaching rescue, and I've taught rescue for a long time, they say, never use your knife, only use your knife for emergency purposes. And I've kind of changed my theme on that now. I think it's use your knife for everything, like making your sandwich and cutting your fruit and do whatever, but keep your knife sharp. And the reason why they said before, never use your knife, is that they don't want you to dull it in use. But the reason why I say use your knife, just keep it sharp, is that I want people to think, I want my guides to think that if they're caught up in something, here's my knife, right? Without any thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I'm stuck in something. Here's my knife, right? And the more times over the course of a day or a month or a season or whatever that you reach for your knife to use it, the more likely it's going to be in that muscle memory to be able to use. So the old adage of never use your knife unless it's a life-saving situation. Use your knife for anything, including peanut butter and cutting fruit. Just make sure that you keep it sharp.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that one a lot. Next thing I want to ask about is flotation in a PFD. Like, how important? I know we've been talking a lot. I've been talking a lot with friends. Do we want to have minimum flotation, or is it worth the extra effort to have more flotation?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think it depends a little bit on your person, what you're doing, what the expectations are of who's wearing any given PFD. So, for example, my rafting customers, which have a wide variety of being anywhere from expert swimmers to complete novices, we put them in high flotation PFDs. In fact, we put them in high flotation PFDs with a leg strap or a crotch strap, which goes from the back of the jacket, from the backyard to the front yard, underneath their legs and clips in the front. And the reason why we do that, despite the fact that it potentially creates a little bit of an entrapment problem if that strap were to get stuck on something, is that, the one size fits all, I mean, people just aren't the same shape. So if someone's a little bit more pear-shaped, if we grab onto the PFD and haul them back in the boat, we might get the jacket in, but we might not pull them in. So I've seen that when people have flushed downstream and maybe become unresponsive, often in, let's say, fatalities where a body's gone missing, that it's quite common that the PFD comes off of them when they stop having their regular respirations, that it's easy for it to be able to come off when their arms are extended downstream in front of them. So that leg strap is good. High flotation, because we don't know about their ability to swim, that's good. Personally, I'm a low flotation person, and that's because what I want to emphasize more than my ability to float is my ability to maneuver. So whether that's in a raft, canoe, or kayak, or also when I'm a swimmer, I think of myself as a rescue swimmer, as a field expedient watercraft. And so I need to have as much mobility as possible. If I have a super high flotation life jacket, or PFD, then I start losing some of that mobility. So, sometimes I'll be teaching certain groups that would prefer a higher flotation jacket, like maybe a military group or a firefighter group, that they use that higher flotation because they're not as confident in the water as either navigating or controlling a watercraft or as a strong swimmer. But as a raft guide, canoeist, or kayaker, I use something which has a lower profile, lower flotation, greater mobility.
Yeah. Here's a question from Brandon. I'm going to put up. Can you see that?
Yes. Yeah, great point. So, having some protection, chapstick, any of those things to be able to protect yourself from your health. It's I'm probably the first one who should have been saying that, because I've recently had some health issues based on a lot of time outside, etc., and needing some of that. So yes, point well taken, Brandon. Having some sunblock and/or chapstick, any of those things being beneficial. The same thing with carrying a water bottle with you, so that you can stay hydrated while you're out on the river, especially on the Ottawa, like many other places in the world. If you're doing day trips, those long, hot August days, sure, you're getting wet on the outside, but you also need to get wet on the inside. So having a water bottle to add to that, as far as your own personal care goes, I think is quite valuable.
The next question I have is whistles. I agree with you 100%. Be conservative. I feel like when a whistle blows, everybody should be like, okay, what's going on? So if it's a regular occurrence, that goes away. Do you go by any signals, like 1 means something, 3 means something else?
Sure. Yeah. So we use 1 means stop and look at the person who's whistling, right? They're trying to gather some attention. 3 long, loud whistle blasts with a distinct pause and then repeated, for us, means we have an actual emergency. And with that, we want all of our trained personnel to look towards and move towards where that whistle blast is coming from. So 3 long, loud repeat or blasts with a pause and then repeated. Sometimes when in rescue training or in a rescue situation, we might use whistles directionally, and typically 2 short blasts like tweet tweet, okay, might be or is often used for upstream. Look upstream, move upstream, pull upstream. Something's happening upstream, which I think is easy because 2 blasts and the word up, UP, right? For those who are hooked on phonics, 2 letters, right, means up, right? And then 3 short blasts, tweet tweet tweet, not to be confused with 3 long blasts with a pause and then repeated, but 3 short blasts, tweet tweet tweet, often means look downstream, move downstream, something's happening downstream, pull downstream. And it's a bit of a bummer that the 3 blasts and the word down have 3 and 4 as opposed to. But yeah, those are some of the basic whistle commands that we use. And when we just want to get someone's attention, we often have a way that we would call out to them. So here in Mexico, they say uhe, right? And in Australia, they would say kui, right? There might be some different combinations of that, but really what I like the most before we're about to head downstream, if we're using other signals like a hand up in the air or a paddle up in the air, meaning proceed or we're ready to go, what I like to do is look over at my other guides, make eye contact, little head nod, they nod back. And to me, that just makes me feel like we're all on the same page, that we're part of a team. And so we're not outwardly vocal when we don't need to be, so that when we do hear whistles, we're like tuned in and turned on that we have an issue or a problem. There's one place on our home river where people will whistle before shouting to someone. And so someone's floating downstream and one person whistles, and then another person's floating past, and the second person whistles, and a third person floats past and they whistle. And now all of my guides are like paranoid that there's an actual emergency.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a desensitivity to whistles if you hear them too often. I think that's a bad thing. You definitely, like for me, I want my heart to drop a little bit when I hear a whistle. It's like, okay, well, get serious. Instead of just being, well, I wonder what that is. Like, I feel like your heart should drop a little bit. So I want to talk about your Prussics. I have the hollow block, that same one. I'm a big fan. And this Sterling one, I've been using the auto block. Here's a bunch of them. I've been using these a bunch. I actually like working with these more personally. But these are awesome. They grab onto anything, like almost any diameter. But I have a sort of a technical swiftwater rescue question.
Sure.
I use these, but I also feel like the Prussics are like a circuit breaker in the system. Like if it gets too overloaded, the Prussic breaking is better than something else breaking. And if you have these are so strong that these probably won't break. It sort of removes the circuit breaker to the system. And so do you agree with the circuit breaker idea? Right. And then what do you think about using these with that?
So I do, but with the circuit breaker idea, it's not about the Prussic breaking, which we don't want anything to break.
Yeah.
It's about having that circuit breaker being the grip strength of the Prussic slipping. So, so still you'll find, whether it's with hollow block or regular, 5 or 6 mil Prussic cord or whatever, that as this is wrapped around whatever that happens to be able to cam onto it, that the slip strength that this will slip before the actual material will break. So that's where your circuit breaker is.
Do you think that, these grab on amazingly well. Do you think these will, I don't think these will slip. I'm just guessing. Do you think they'll slip?
Typically the slip strength is lower than the breaking strength.
Okay. Is that something that they built into Prussics when they design them, or it just sort of luckily happens?
I think again, all of these things depend on the specific material that you're using. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but that's typically when we think of that idea of there being a fuse within a system. It's the slip strength on the Prussic. And one of the ways that you could also do that is by putting fewer wraps. So when they did a bunch of testing on the classic 3-wrap Prussic with Prussic, with cord, that a guy named Arne Larsen, who was like Mr. Prussic at the time, did all these different tests, And what he found was that the slip strength was lower than the breaking strength of the rope. And that's where 3-wrap prusiks really came into fashion. What is interesting though, that Zach, that you mightn't know about these is that often, people don't use pulleys all that often. So it's not uncommon to go and get, a pulley like this, which is pretty affordable. It's got a nylon wheel as opposed to metal wheel. It's got a, it doesn't have ball bearings or any of those. I mean, this is a $15 pulley. It's good because it reduces friction. But these, which are so common, have quite a wide diameter. So it will accept quite thick rope, up to 13 millimeters. And one of the problems with hollow block is that because it's flat, when this is all connected here to your line, normally this is designed as a prusik minding pulley, but often with hollow block, when this gets pulled in, it will get eaten by these wide 13 millimeter pulleys. And the solution to that is to get a thinner pulley. So at your, wherever you're going to put your prusik minding pulley at the back of your system, have something which is narrower, which only really accepts up to a 10 millimeter rope. So this is for 9, I use 9 typically with hollow block or with 6 millimeter cord. And this will actually mind using the thinner pulley as opposed to this one. And that's something that I just worked out in teaching so many different classes, that I would go and look and see someone's system didn't seem to be working correctly. And it was based on having a wider pulley at the back, a 13 mil pulley versus the smaller 10 mil. So, and that's a problem that many people don't realize when they go, oh, I'm going to get some hollow block. Right?
No, it's worth buying these and using them. And that's actually why I've gone to the auto block, which is the circular one. I just like this a lot more. It's easier to work with myself. But for some cases, I'm using this. So here's a question from Blair.
Sure. Okay, that's a great question, Blair. And sometimes it's kind of weird to say it this way. Sometimes the difference between innovation and heresy is like a really narrow line. And so I've tried to be quite innovative when I think of swiftwater rescue, which sometimes puts me in that heretic line in some people's thoughts or opinion. So what I'm going to say is this. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say I don't put something to, a weight, or what they often refer to as a damper or a dampener, to be able to bring the line down. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, normally on my load, wherever I can, I will hook onto 2 different points, so that if one of those points were to blow out, in fact, nothing is going to come flying back. All that's going to happen is it's going to inject some slack, poof, into the system, and I might fall down on my butt. Okay. The other reason why is that I think that putting that dampener in often leaves us a little bit of false security. And the reason why I say that is that if, let's say, I was just on one point, or both of those points out on the load were to break at the same time and everything were to come flying back, perhaps that dampener would be valuable. But more likely, on the shore side of that weight or dampener, I'll probably end up having a prusik with a pulley and a carabiner. And if I'm standing in the line of fire and pulling, and that prusik breaks, which might have been a piece of cord that's been in a guide's life jacket for 2 years, and it's been wet all the time, and it's maybe been degraded or whatever that happens to be. If that prusik breaks, then that pulley and carabiner still will come flying back towards the pullers, irregardless of the weight further out on the line. So what I believe is that when we get back to our anchor, we should never be standing in the line of fire. So I put in an additional pulley and carabiner and stand a minimum of 2 meters or 6 feet away from the anchor point to pull from a position outside of the line of fire, which then means that I don't need to have that dampener on the line, because even if something does go flying, nobody's standing in the way.
I mean, Jim, this brings to me, I had a similar question. I've been thinking about this a lot because I feel like a lot of swiftwater rescue people now are teaching, don't do 3-to-1s. they're saying they're dangerous and don't do them, and instead do vector pulls, which I've never heard of a vector pull actually working in the field. I hear it in theory, it sounds good, but I've never heard of anybody using it and effectively performing a rescue. And my new theory is if you attach to 2 points on the load on the boat and you do a redirect, you're double covered.
Correct.
Right. That should be plenty. So you can do all the 3-to-1s you want as long as you have 2 points on the boat and a redirect. And I like the 6 feet away rule. That seems like a pretty awesome solution to me.
Yeah. So, I'm from Canada, and Canadians take rescue courses because they want to live the Canadian dream, which is to go away for as long as possible, as far away as possible, up to the Arctic or whatever that happens to be. And our national craft is the tandem open canoe, which of all the different watercrafts is the easiest to get stuck or wrapped or pinned and the hardest to unwrap and unpin. So we use those a lot. When we look at the idea of a vector pull, where I think that works best is not with a raft, which is soft, which gets stuck on something and then folds. Because as we pull on that vector, we get a lot of force at the beginning, when the line is taut at 180 degrees. But by the time we're at 170, we're getting 5 to 1 force. By the time we're at 150, we're getting 2 to 1 force. By the time we're at an angle of 120, we're only getting 1 to 1 force. And so where that works better is with a pinned kayak. So a kayak goes over and gets pinned, and really, this something which pinned is this combination of force of the water and friction, right? So that combination of force and friction, when a kayak is pinned, is maybe only a few centimeters or inches of actual friction contact with a rock or whatever that happens to be.
Yep.
So there, you can get your line, and before you go into building your other forms of mechanical advantage, then you can get that line, you can pull it super tight, you can wrap it around the tree, and you can try and vector pull it. And because you're really only looking for a little bit of movement, that it often sort of goes timber,
that makes sense,
and comes out. So that's where they end up working best. The other thing which is tricky with a vector pull is that typically most people don't know sort of the way or the secret or whatever of being able to capture your progress while you're doing a vector pull. So you pull on the line and it moves a little bit, let's say a raft, it unfolds a bit, but then you slack off and it folds back into its position.
Yep.
And so often the best way to do that is by doing something called progressive vectoring, or many people, an old age term for it is swigging, which they used to use with bringing boats up onto the beach. And you would actually put 2 lines out to the craft, pull on one, manually tighten up on that second line. Now you've captured your progress. Let your line slide back in again, tighten it up, pull again, pull on your second line to capture all of your progress. So anyhow, it's called progressive vectoring. We've got some videos about it, and we've got a new Rescue for River Runner series coming out, being starting to be filmed. Yeah, it's starting to be filmed in Canada, United States, Mexico, and Costa Rica, starting this summer and ending sometime in November or December of next year. And that's a lot based on, the paddle sports world has had this this amazing boom with the COVID situation, and so we're looking at, again, NRS is really keen to get more rescue information out there. So we're super stoked, and got our great videographer Mike McKay from 5 to 9 Productions is really stoked on the project as well.
So will that be something that's also free on YouTube that NRS is sponsoring and it's free to everybody, or will it be a paid thing?
No, it'll be free. And again, sort of going back to both mine and your most recent leading steep podcast is there's something to be said for giving away your best work. And so we're very, we feel honored and fortunate to be able to get a little bit of sponsorship from NRS, to be able to provide those Rescue for River Runners videos, for the general public free of charge.
Great.
Because we think that it's a great way to give people a bit of an appetite for swiftwater rescue, and hopefully it inspires them to take some training and get some more experience. And I had no idea, but it turned out to be one of the the best projects that I've been involved in, not knowing that it would turn out so well with not making it a monetary thing.
I think it's so important too. Like, I think people will inspire people to take training, but there's people who go rafting 5 times a year and they just need a little bit of info, or like there's a leader who they're with who's an expert, but there's 5 friends who, as long as they have some info, they can support the leader if something goes wrong. So there's definitely people who don't need a full class, but need some information.
Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful for her. I'm going to buzz through my questions real quick, and then I want to get to your class. That canyoneering rope you had in your throw bag, does that float?
Well, just. So it's a rope by PMI, and for those who don't know that much about rope, you would think that it's easy to just get a super amazing multi-purpose floating rope, but this idea of floating makes things really problematic because those materials, which are so strong, aren't naturally buoyant. So this has a very tightly woven sheath. So when I throw it out onto the water, especially if it's been taken care of and dried and then repacked, etc. Yes, it floats, and then but if it were to be saturated in the water, it would eventually end up sinking down. And it's again one of the things that I'm experimenting with because I paddle a lot of rivers where the idea of having to raise and lower become true things that we may need to do, and that becomes really problematic if I only have a polypropylene rope in a throw bag, because I know I shouldn't be doing those type of things with that rope. And often the reason why I like people to be prepared, this idea of preparation and opportunity, is that if you don't have the right gear, you're probably going to do it anyways. Like you need a rope to haul someone up, and you don't have a high quality rope, but you have a medium quality rope or a lower quality rope, it's probably not going to be anyone who's going to say, no, that rope's not good enough. Instead, they're going to say, oh, hope this works, right? And then find out that that you're using the inappropriate equipment for the task at hand. So I like to think I don't like to have to decide which rope should I bring today. I bring my best gear with me because I never know what's going to happen, right? It could be a really challenging situation.
I think a lot of people would say your throw bag has to float. And I feel like in what we're doing, there's no exact perfect rope for everything. And we're always choosing trade-offs based on what we're doing. So for some people that would never do a vertical extraction, sure, they should have a floating rope. But if you have if you boat where you have a possible extraction, you may choose to have a stronger rated rope over something that floats. Like that's a decision you make based on what you're doing.
Correct. And with that, rope that is, call it neutrally buoyant. I mean, no one wants a rope that's just going to sink, right? Down the bottom. But when rope is under tension in the current, it will naturally trend to the surface. So if let's say someone were floating downstream and they were going to be, and I just knew where the hazard was, they're only going to be 5 meters away or 15 feet away. Instead of throwing them my entire 60-foot or 20-meter throw bag, I would maybe butterfly out a small portion or just reach in and grab a handful of rope and just toss it. And if I'm just getting enough or a little bit more than what they need, then I'm not putting that sort of anchor of rope in behind them. So there's something to be said to know not just how to throw a throw bag, but know how to throw rope as well, because you may choose that it's better to only throw half of your throw bag than your full throw bag, so that people don't get caught and tangled up in the rope.
Yep. I have one more question that we can move on. I really want to hear about Wild. You talked about the phone. I can't agree with you more. I started bringing it to take photos, but I find myself using a map. If we have to do an evacuation, I'll pull my map out. I had a woman hit her head kayaking, and I was like, that's a mechanism of injury that requires immediate evac. And so I looked at my phone and said, here's how we're going to get you out. Like, that was super handy. If I didn't have that phone, I might have said, let's just paddle out. Like, let's just deal. But because I knew how to get her out on a trail, I'm like, let's hike you out. So I'm a fan of it for that reason, for the light, for everything you're saying. I feel like we should all carry phones now. They exist, but that's just my opinion. Would you carry a spare battery too, or like a backup battery to charge it in your watershed bag?
Yeah, so I think it depends a little bit on the length of the expedition.
Mm-hmm.
when we're running day trips, we're packing and unpacking and drying things out every night, so things get recharged all the time. We also do multi-day canoe expeditions, and on those canoe expeditions, we would either carry a spare battery or a Go Zero solar charging pad that we can then end up charging up. The problem with the Go Zero situation is that often the times when it's the most sunny and you'd want to be charging is the time that we're also heading downstream, and we have to have it in a waterproof container. But so I think it depends a little bit on the expedition. The longer you're out, the more you're going to use it, the more likelihood that you need that extra battery. So we do, with our satellite phones on our expedition trips, we typically stick with the idea that no news is good news. So we don't have our staff messing around with the phone, turning it on, turning it off, leaving it on, etc. Call us when there's a problem. And one of the new devices, which is kind of cool, is called Zoleo. It's one of the things that we're looking at moving to next year, and it's a satellite connector based, where you connect your iPhone to Zoleo, and you can text in a Zoleo app if you're in Wi-Fi. You can text in the Zoleo app if you're in cellular, and you can text in the Zoleo app when you're in satellite area, and it picks the cheapest one of those along the way. So we have, I have a logistics person who, the two of us look after any of our, sort of emergency, and we do that not just for our company, but for sort of the greater community and some of our rivers as a call-in center, and so the two of us communicate with Zoleo.
I want to go back to what you just said about the satellite phone. No news is good news. I'm the same way. A lot of outfitters, their guides have to check the text every night, or they have to call in to whatever. I'm a fan of only use it in emergency. Don't turn it on and waste the battery. Like, call us if there's a problem, but don't check in, because that can actually create more communication problems. If you expect a text message and you don't get it, or something happens. So I'm 100%, like, they're used for outgoing calls for emergencies, but don't use them for incoming, for just checking in.
Yeah, problems with the battery, messing around with the antenna, you twisting the antenna, and the antenna just came off. And the other one, which is also problematic, like you're saying, expecting a text to come in is a problem, but also, satellite technology isn't perfect, and you have to be, have a wide open sky to be able to have a prolonged conversation. So in the event that you're talking and someone phones in and say, hey, it's Jim from the river, and then click, people are like, why was he calling in? So we have a special protocol when we have an emergency on the phone, called Slater, SLATER, and it's situation. So, the first thing that if you have an emergency, you're calling in, is that you say, we have a situation, so that whoever is answering the phone gets rid of the other stuff on their desk and pulls out the red binder and is like starting to take notes. And then L stands for location and leader. And we want to get the location out first, so that if the whole conversation just clicks off, then we at least know where they are, and we can then try to predict what we should do, which is, plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? To be able to send help in for them, because we might not hear from them. We might just get, we have a situation, we're at Rapid Arrangé, click. That's all we get. So location and leader. I like to know who the leader is, because I can predict how some of my guides would think, knowing them a little bit differently. A is assessment. So we have a situation, we're at Rapid Arrangé, this is Jim, we have a suspected spinal injury. T is treatment. So we're immobilizing the person. E, SLATE, is evacuation. And we think of evacuation as where the person in the field is going to be moved to. So we're at Rapid Arrangé in the middle, but we're going to move down to the campsite at the bottom of the rapid where the road comes in. And then R is for rendezvous, and that's if we're going to do the transport, where we're going to meet. So it could be, maybe it's not a spinal injury, maybe it's a twisted ankle, that that it happened at one rapid, but they're going to keep on going downstream to a bridge that's 10 kilometers downstream. That's where we're going to have our rendezvous with our vehicle. So situation, location leader, assessment, treatment, evacuation, rendezvous, Slater protocol. And that way we're not messing around having a conversation saying, oh, hi, this is Jim, and how are you? Well, we've got a problem, click. And then we don't catch another satellite, for the next hour, right? So
I wrote that smart. I wrote that down. I'm going to borrow that from you guys if that's okay.
Okay.
I like that a lot. I tell my guides, I say the first thing I want to hear is everything is okay, everything's not okay. That's the first thing out of your mouth when you get in touch with me. Because I was on a trip once where we just called out because we ran out of something that we needed and we thought somebody could hike it in. And that's all I got through. I called and it was like, hey, how's it going? I need blank. And it hung up. And they had to come in thinking it was an emergency when we just needed some supplies that we didn't actually need.
Right.
So right away, it's like
we're out of toilet paper,
Yeah. In this case, it was a bachelor party and we were out of beer. And so,
that's an emergency.
we I thought, well, maybe we can get somebody to hike in some beer to save the bachelor party. But it turns out they just heard like a quick hello and somebody had to hike in anyway. I'm assuming it was an emergency, that's a bad situation. So like, I looked back at that mistake I made in my youth and now it's like right away, is there a problem or not? That's the first thing I want to hear.
Yeah. And that's for us, that word situation is like, we have a situation. Uh-oh. Whoop, 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 red lights going on.
Yep. Or like we need a flight out. Things are fine, but we need a flight out because a guest found out something, or like so everything's fine, but we want to make sure our shuttle is taken care of, so like right away, like are things okay or not? So then we can figure out what to do.
Yeah. Well, that news is good news. That's the way it's best to work.
I agree. And again, I've been on trips where we used the phone battery doing stupid things. And then when we needed it, we had super limited battery to deal with an emergency. And so I'm hypersensitive on that one. So I want to hear about the WILD program. And the reason I want to ask about it, because, people are always learning how to become river guides. And most education is either on the job or like a 6 to 8 day guide school. And what you're offering is a 90-day guide school. And so I'm wondering, who's this for? Like, how does this work? Like this is amazing to me.
Sure. So WILD stands for the Whitewater Intensive Leadership Development School. And it's a registered vocational school in the province of Quebec. And so that helps so that people can get educational funding to be able to participate. And the idea behind it is multifold. Often people will take a piecemeal amount of training. So they do a guides course, but they still need to have wilderness first aid, and they still need to have swiftwater rescue training. And then they still have to be able to be a master of their craft, whether it's rafting, canoeing, kayaking, whatever that happens to be. And so there are a lot of people who are certificate hunters. They go out and they get all of those certificates, and they're all listed really nicely on their resume, but they didn't have the opportunity, having just done all of those courses, to actually get the experience that you need while you have those courses to be able to have a layer of wisdom and competency in the event that something goes wrong. So the idea behind WILD as a 90-day semester style program is that people get that training, but they also get the practice to lead to the combination of experience and judgment to become excellent whitewater guides in whatever their craft happens to be. And we find that of the acronym Whitewater Intensive Leadership Development, the key word is intensive. So the intensity of being out every day for 90 days shoots people's skill level up high. I mean, there are many people who are kayakers that don't get 90 days on the river. It might take them 9 years to get 90 days to go out 10, one day a weekend, 10 weekends in a row over the summertime. So that going out on the water, being on the water, and even switching crafts, like we find that someone does a bunch of canoeing and then they do a bunch of kayaking. When they come back again to the canoeing, they're better at canoeing because they had those 5 days kayaking in between. Or they started off rafting and then they went canoeing and kayaking. And then the next thing you know, when they got back to rafting again, now they're reading the water better and they're better at rafting. So all of those different disciplines end up compounding on each other. The other thing that course does is that apart from the hard skills, it's a leadership development course. So we focus on wilderness first aid, swiftwater rescue, rafting, canoeing, kayaking, outdoor ethics, and wilderness leadership. And so we travel typically this year, not because of COVID, 5 weeks in Canada, 3 weeks driving through the United States, and then 4 weeks in Mexico. And so in Canada, there's a very strong appreciation of our incredible wilderness resources of, the wild of Canada. Some of the rivers we hit in the United States have an amazing amount of fun and challenge to them, like the Gauley River, the upper lower Gauley, the New River. And then we even go to the to the National Whitewater Center in Charlotte, which is something that we don't have artificial courses in Canada at this point in time. So that's kind of something interesting to see. But really the core part of what makes Wild so unique is that when we are in Mexico, our students typically homestay with local families. The course that I just started today, they're staying in hotels because of the COVID situation. But that homestay with local families, the meet people of different cultures, of different economic status and background, but realize that people still are, have lots of dignity regardless of their material wealth, etc. Just drives that empathy, which is so important in leadership, drives that message home to all of our students. And then fortunately for us, many of our students we end up hiring as guides in the future. And Wild graduates have worked in all corners of the world with some of the most prestigious companies, and many people like hiring Wild graduates because they've had the opportunity to have this longer, more extended training.
Yeah.
They have a high tolerance for adversity and uncertainty, over the intensity of that program. And it's a program that's based on the doers rather than the don'ters. So if we woke up at the lower Gauley and it was snowing in October and some people were tired and they didn't want to go, they don't have to go. But if one person wants to go, we're going, because it's geared towards those that want to do things. So it's a really wonderful program. It's an honor to teach with Wild. Some of my combination of greatest guides that I've met, greatest friends that I've made, greatest people that I know are all graduates of that program. And it's nice to have a part in that portion of the development of their life. And I've had many students who've come to me at some point in time in that trip, whether one day in particular was going to see what we call the Sótano de los Golondrinas, which is this huge cave, famous cave in Mexico where tens of thousands of swallows go flying out at sunrise, to then go to a river called Micos and run a series of waterfalls. And at the end of the day, having them come up to me and say, Jim, today was the greatest day of my life. And
Wow.
we hear that quite often. So people who take that course, some people who want to become guides, some people who are looking for a career change, some people who have some time off. In the past, you could spend the same amount of money on a 3-month holiday in Europe as you would to do Wild. Whereas Wild, you get a skill, a sport, and a trade. And maybe if you'd gone to Europe for that long, all you might have to show for it is a hangover, So we get a wide variety of young people from as young as 18 years old and up to, we've had participants 65 years old. And right now, the program that we just started today has an interesting dynamic of it's an older group. Our youngest participant is 32 years old. And it's quite wonderful because that's a demographic that we haven't had the experience of dealing as much with. And they're a group which now has a combination of time and money to be able to do some travel and want to improve on their skills.
it's amazing to me that there's a course that long for river guides. Do you think that most, I mean, I would love my guides to go to a course that long. It would be amazing. Like if you have graduates that need jobs, send them my way, because that
Okay.
sounds like an amazing background for a river guide. Do you feel like people, and that, like, what percentage of the people that take it actually go on to be river guides?
I would say probably 50% go on for at least 1 year. Okay,
Yeah.
I've done this, and now I'm going to work in that industry.
Yeah.
And then probably 50% of those, so now 25% of graduates, stay on, and I would say make it a career, or make it part of their career, that they became river guides for 5 years and then decided to take their water knowledge and their rescue skills and their medical training, and then they've decided to become firefighters. So
Yeah,
there's
okay.
a correlation with that. Others have started their own rafting companies. Others
Wow.
have gone on to work at outdoor education centers like Thompson River University. Many have done the circuit to travel the whole world, and I think they're all quite proud from their background and training. And for me, it's probably the legacy of this industry that I'm most satisfied with, as far as my sort of legacy and contribution.
I'm so impressed by it. Like, most guide schools, like I said, are 8 or 10 days. I have this idea of offering like a 21-day course here in the future. To have a 90-day course, to me, is mind blowing. It actually gives me hope that the 21-day course is possible, because it's hard enough to get people to take an 8 or 10-day course. So
Right.
it's like, I love the idea that, like, you're pushing the boundary way beyond what I thought was possible. The last question I have for you is about outdoor leadership, and it's something that I find hard to teach because I have a hard time putting my finger on it. I think Knowles has an ethic that's good. I think it's hard to teach. To me, I haven't figured that out. Like, when you're teaching outdoor leadership, what are you actually teaching?
Okay, that's a great question, and I, like you, was somewhat mystified about, okay, I'm an outdoor leader, but what does that mean? It was something that for the longest time I think I was unconsciously competent about. It was just one of those things that I did. I didn't know how I did it. It was, kind of, I had learned along the way. I was fortunate years ago that after many years in the industry, I was able to participate in call it a Knowlesification. So Knowles runs a program called the Professional River Instructor Program, or
Mm-hmm.
course, and they would take people from outside of the Knowles world to give them a bit of that Knowles style training, because they even realized that they had so many instructors that were former Knowles instructor or former Knowles students, that they weren't really connected to the outside of the Knowles world either. So it was this sort of give and take bit, that they would take people like myself, who had a lot of other outside of Knowles experience. They would give me the Knowles version, and I would give them the Esprit version, or my version of how
Yeah.
that worked. But really, the guts to what you're talking about, and the way that I think that we teach outdoor leadership. Yes, we can, have a few sessions on, these are pillars of leadership, or these are core skills that you should work on, or whatever. But really, it's about good staff modeling good outdoor leadership. And then I think to add to that is to have a lot of communication. So we will typically, at my operation, we meet formally a lot. Like, we meet at 7 a.m, and then we pack everything up and we go to the river. And just before we go in the river, we have a quick meeting again. And then we have lunch, and then we do a shuttle, and then we get back on the river again, and we have another quick little meeting, and then we do our trip. And at the end of the day, we have a debriefing. So we've met 4 times just amongst the staff to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And so whenever someone sort of strays out of that model of demonstrating that good, call it expedition behavior, or some of those other pillars of leadership, then we're able to talk about it and bring it all back to center again. And so for me, it's not a course or something that I'm that I formally feel that, okay, now we're going to do the outdoor leadership course.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
but instead it's leading by example, good modeling, lots of talking and communication. And for me, when we do that wild program and we drive essentially from Canada to Mexico, I think one of the areas where people learn the most is that our staff are driving, and we always require one of the students to be a shotgunner who stays awake, making sure that the driver's awake. Sometimes we're driving through the long hours or through the evening, and sometimes just those discussions are some of the nuggets that people end up holding on to for the rest of their life, that as they were driving through West Virginia at night, talking to their instructor about what it's like in this industry, that they're able to pick up on some of those leadership traits as well.
So do you think, I think I hear what you're saying, that it's less about teaching a class on outdoor leadership out of the Knowles Handbook, more about having good leaders modeling the right behavior?
Correct. That's okay. My belief. And that's because I'm not a formal educator per se. Yeah. I've picked up my education skills sort of, again, through other people who've modeled that well, including one of inspiration of mine from many years ago, who was a school teacher and canoe trip leader, a fellow by the name of James Skeeter Lee, who I'm still friends with today as both a friend and think of him as a mentor that I've had over many years, since I've been 15, so for 40 years.
And so you have, like, you're teaching this with other people that they have a certain, sorry to keep going this, but I'm super curious about it.
No problem.
Like, there's 4 or 5 of you or 3 of you, whatever it is, teaching this wild course. Amongst you, do you have a formal, like, this is how leaders are, or you just know them and you're like, you know what, they're the kind of leader I like, they're going to model the behavior? Or do you actually give them instruction on how to model that behavior?
Well, typically our instructors on Wild are people who have been guides with our operation with Esprit for many years. And now, because Wild has gone on for more than 20 years, there's another generation that often people are become instructors on Wild, having formerly been students on Wild. And so really the selection process, there's more selection in advance of, okay, this person is going to be able to do this skill really well and shows and demonstrates these, this type of character. So it's really in that hiring process that we have very little training of our staff on Wild. They're already at what I believe is the top of their game.
So, I mean, I'm asking these questions because I'm having this debate in my head right now. Like, I want to definitely, like, training is an important thing to me, and I'm always iterating to get better. Like, we have training, but I'm always like, let's make it better this year. Let's make it better that year. And so I'm trying to decide right now whether we have sit down classes on outdoor leadership, or do I focus energy on that, or whether I focus energy on making sure that a handful of people model behavior. And so, and then if I do that, how do I get them to model the behavior that I want?
Right. I think there's a combination of both, but I really think it's based on having the right people, doing the right thing, showing and modeling what you want those newer participants to be able to do. And I think that's really the guts of it. Now, at the same point in time, you need to have a bit of a starting place. So we may say, look, here's 7 or 10 pillars of leadership, and what are you strongest at, and what is your weakest, and who is someone that you identify with this pillar. And there's a few other of those, call it Knowlesy type things that I would end up doing with my group. But really over the long term, and again, we're talking a 90-day program, we might have 2 or 3 or 4 2-hour sessions like that. But really the guts is, how do people perform in and out every day? Because if you can, it's one thing to talk the talk, but you really have to also walk the walk. So I can't talk about these are the things you need to be a good leader, and then not model that appropriately, right? Yeah. So you have to have a bit of a combination of the two.
It's amazing.
what's in the field is the most important, I think.
That helps me so much right there. Thank you. These are just questions for me, not for everybody, but like it's helping me right now with what I'm going through. I see a couple of questions from the audience, then we'll wrap this thing up and let you
Sure.
go on to dinner or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, unless everything ends up running out of battery here in Mexico or whatever. So, okay, so I see a question from Mike. What's the best location in the world to work as a whitewater guide? Wow, super loaded question, and I think that varies for every person and what they're trying to get out of their experience. So, years ago, as a very young guide, I was able to, fortunate enough to work in Africa on the Zambezi River, and the Zambezi is just incredible as far as the whitewater goes, and the experience with the fact that you're in Africa and all of those things. And I was also fortunate enough to work in Chile on the Futaleufú River with a couple of different companies there, not just as a guide, but providing some consulting on how to improve their operation, from customer service to staff training to staff engagement and things. And that's really wonderful. And I love living in Latin countries and places where where I enjoy speaking Spanish, etc. I have a bit of attention deficit problem, so I like things which change a lot. I like being able to do things differently, and so outdoor schools and programs such as Knowles and Outward Bound, and places that provide a lot of training. So like our program with Esprit, where you can do some. You can be busy all summer canoeing and teaching kayaking and teaching water rescue, and then going rafting, and then doing an expedition, and now you're on wild, and then we're going to go to Costa Rica, and then we're going to be back in Mexico. I really like that type of movement. So I'm the type of person where a change is as good as a rest. So if I'm switching it up a bit, then I'm good to go. Whereas if I'm doing 50 days of rafting in a row, that ends up wearing on me. I think what I really want, though, and this may be the best way to answer your question, is that although there's some specific locations which are wonderful, whether it's Mexico, Costa Rica, Canada, Pacific Northwest, there's lots of amazing places. It really comes down to the people, and the people that you spend the most time with is your coworkers and whomever you happen to be working with or for. So I really try to engage being in a place which has a what I would consider as high standards, challenges their guides to be responsible and take things to another level, and that when I'm out on the river, I want to be able to look around and see that the other people who I'm with are really my teammates, and that if something were to go wrong with me, that they would have my back, or that if something were to go wrong with them, that I would know what to do to be able to help them out as much as possible. One thing that I believe, if you're trying to do the international circuit of guiding, or even just a national circuit, let's say in the United States, where you can work on the East Coast and the West Coast or whatever, I think it's always best to spend a minimum of 2 years wherever you're going to work. When people want to see it all and do it all so fast, one, eventually, if you're going to have a 20-year career, you're going to run out of places to go. But also, if you just go somewhere and you're a guide for 1 year, then someone says, hey, do you know Jim Coffey? And it's like, oh, yeah, I think he was here once. He was good. But if I go to that place once and then I go back there again, then normally that second time I'm there, like I have it. I'm able to show my expertise and my skills and things. So when someone says, oh, have you heard of, do you know this guy, Jim Coffey? Then it's like, yeah, he was here. He was here for a couple of years, and he really helped us progress. So I don't think you need to rush your way around the world or rush your way around the country or the continent. Minimum 2 years in each location. And there's always opportunities to be able to move on, especially if you've done a really good job working somewhere. And so I always think it's better to leave an operation before you're burnt out and too tired to continue on working with them. And it's way better to speak with the ownership and say, okay, this was great, but I have to move on because I don't want to, I'm working up at my peak and I don't want to be in a decline working for you. So do you have any suggestions on where I can go? And and our operation, we gladly recommend other companies for our staff to go and work with, because we want them to go and get that experience, and then hopefully maybe they'll decide,
Yep.
you know what, it was Nirvana working at Esprit, I'm going back there again in the future. So so those are some of the things. So it's, I find I just love being on rivers, and I love river people, and I love the challenge, and I love being with our guests and customers. That, I don't know, it's pretty hard for me to find a place I don't want to be in the river world. So that might be a long way to not answer your question, Mike, but I appreciate it anyways.
Without getting too specific, there's so many great places to work. It's hard to pick one. That's for sure. Here's a question from Ty that kind of builds on our discussion earlier.
Okay. So, yeah. So firstly, Ty Smith is one of my top guides of my entire life that I know, and one of my best friends. So he's maybe loading this here a little bit, but many guides that have become strong leaders when their leadership skills weren't necessarily innate. Yeah, I think that we have developed many strong leaders that at first glance we didn't think that they were going to be extraordinary, and that they end up being extraordinary. Often that's not just the fact that we've brought them along that spectrum, but often it's because we categorically misjudged them. Often people think about leaders and leadership as the person who will stand up and yell things out, and is very very dynamic in their leadership. But that's not all the way that leadership is. There are many people who are more soft-spoken, maybe more self-aware, as opposed to being such a trying to be the center of attention all the time. And so I think that again, time being around other good leaders and having that modeled, and having sort of a standard which is set for what those expectations are the way that we end up fostering that. And it's amazing to see the progression when someone works for you for 5 years, and they came in, and instead of giving them the job as the rafting guide, they ended up working. We used to have a bar, so they worked as the bartender, and then they kept at it, and they kept at it, and they kept at it, and eventually they turned out to be one of our trip leaders, for example. And we've had situations like that happen often. Another one, Ty, to add to that, which is kind of interesting, is that we've also sometimes had people who've come to work for us, and they didn't have a good summer. Maybe during their summer their dog died, or they had some other issue or problem, or they didn't realize that they weren't performing to their level, or a level that was really expected of them. And so each year, when someone is coming back to work for us, we sometimes have people apply to work for us that they didn't have a great summer the year before. And so we'll mention to them and challenge them, saying, these are some of the things that weren't perfect last year. Do you have a way to mitigate those problems this year? And in fact, at one point in time, I told one of my staff who had not a good year one year, that I just wanted her to come back and be our employee of the year. That's what I expect from you, and that's what I want you to do. And she turned out to be one of the greatest trip leaders that our company has ever seen. And that was because she may not have realized that she was operating below the bar because we hadn't communicated that well enough. But when we did, she certainly rose to the occasion. Yep. And we trust on people to do that. And so often the more critical the feedback, the more likelihood that it's meant with sincerity, and that will turn around and produce the results that everybody wants.
Yeah, that made me remember, there's a lot of guides who we would maybe have fired, and I said, no, let's tell them what they're doing wrong and let them improve. Let's communicate with them. It seems like they're terrible. Let's just tell them the things that they're doing and then see what happens. And they generally do better just by telling them things. I think a lot of guides get frustrated because you should be able to just show up and do the job. But people do need to know if there's we had a guy who slept in every morning and didn't realize that was a problem. And then we finally, and all the guys wanted to fire him. And I said, well, why don't you tell him he's sleeping in, and then they can't sleep in. And then he never did it again. He just needed to be communicated with. All right, and then we have another. Oh, I want to mention one thing too. That podcast that Barry did with Carrie Gray, this last one. I don't know if you heard it.
I
She
did just
mentioned
yesterday.
it was amazing. I loved it. I'm going to send it to our guides today. And she mentioned that good guides don't have to they don't have to stand in front of everybody to be the center of attention. Like a lot of great guides are there to just kind of make sure things happen well in the background and let the place do the thing. I'm hearing you say the same thing. It's not about a lot of times we think the best guide is the person who's like the big, boisterous, loud center of attention. But what I'm hearing from her and from you is that like that's not necessarily a thing. It's more important that you like are accentuating the experience.
Yeah, and everyone needs to have their their own signature style, and you can't
Yep.
and often when you think of that loud, boisterous, telling jokes, center of attention, you think of short day trips, where you can just have this impact of energy, and but then they're not going to sit down and have dinner with you. Like they're done, like your day ends. We believe that people should be themselves, and that the river corridor or the experience is the real entertainer, and that what we need to do is we need to enhance that. And so, for example, we have a guide, Ty Smith, who happens to play guitar and mandolin. And so on some trips, that music is amazing to have, but it doesn't always have to be a campfire experience. Sometimes just having music in the background is what people really want. So on occasion, Ty will pick up his mandolin or guitar, and it's dinner time, and everyone's kind of sitting around, and they're conversing, and they're still talking. And Ty will go off in the distance to play, not far enough away that people can't hear him, but not far enough that it's a Ty Smith concert. And I think those, again, one of the things that is often spoken about is this idea of combination of empathy, compassion, self-awareness, like real personal things that come in the heart and soul of someone that I think come out more in the longer the trip, the longer the experience, the more natural it is to just be yourself. So we don't want any of our staff to try to be anyone they're not. If you're not a joke teller, don't tell jokes. Learn about the river corridor. Be an ambassador for the river corridor. Here in Mexico, for example, years ago, the only guides in Mexico were people who came in from the city, from Mexico City. There were no local guides in town. Now it's almost all local guides. When I first decided that was the way to go, training local guides, because when there wasn't work, they had other work to do, so they weren't just getting bored and getting in trouble, right? They would do other stuff with their family land or whatever that happens to be. One of the local guides said, yeah, but Jim, I don't know that we can compete with the Mexico City guides, because like we don't know how to joke and socialize with all the people who come from Mexico City. Like we only know about like the trees and the fish and the local legends and the vegetation and what's going on in the community. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the ticket. That's the stuff that we want you to be able to share. And now, to be honest, we can't keep those guys quiet. They are encyclopedias of their river corridor. They are amazing with local stories and legends and things that they were taught by their grandparents or whatever that happens to be. And now they've also gone out, and in this region here, they have pretty much launched the greatest river advocacy campaign that I've ever known of anywhere in the world, which is a real passion of mine, where they set up a 24-hour-a-day, 365-day-a-year blockade for a site where they were looking at building a hydroelectric project to not allow machinery to be able to go in. And all of those things have come as they've gained confidence in really just being themselves. So if you don't think that you've got an outgoing enough personality, you don't know how to tell jokes, any of those type of things, don't worry. Become good at something else, like learning about the river corridor and being an advocate and being kind and compassionate and all of those things, and you can be an amazing guide. So if you have the desire to do it, we as a company, we have the desire to hire you and try and give you a chance or an opportunity. You don't have to be Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or Jim Carrey or any of those other characters.
I love hearing this so much because I've always felt the same way. But to have Carrie and you both repeat those things gives me confidence in how I felt about this for a long time. Because sometimes I feel like we're the company that doesn't have a lot of these super outrageous people. But I feel like there's people who generally, like, is a generalization, like some can entertain 30 people, they can entertain a crowd, but they can't have a one-on-one discussion. And some people are really good at that one-on-one, in-depth, get to know you, and they can have that one-on-one discussion with 10 people that are super meaningful. And so I'd rather have both. Some people that can be loud and whatever, they can entertain the group, but somebody who can like sit next to somebody who doesn't want to be entertained and they want to have a really like deep discussion about something. I feel like it takes all kinds to guide. And I think guides get stereotyped on how they should be. And I'm so into like, just be you, like whoever you are is awesome. Do it your way. You're not here the trip isn't about you. The trip is about the place, and you're here to accentuate it with the way that you are.
Exactly. And that's where I think also, a way that companies can help breed that type of culture and atmosphere comes in their hiring, that hiring people from different backgrounds, different sexes, different philosophies, different countries, whatever that happens to be. That diversification ends up help to cover such a wide spectrum of our guests, is much better than just being this one homogenous, type A or the number one haircut rafting company. And
I mean,
and there are a lot of those.
Imagine having all alphas on your guide crew. Every single one is an alpha guide. That would be just awful.
Yeah, for sure. So that diversity of people is one of the things that can be fostered through the way that companies end up hiring people. And it also has to do with respect. And so one of the things that I've mentioned recently on some other publications and things as well is that, it's easy enough to train people to do what we do out in the field, but it's hard to train people to become good people. So I think that finding out about someone beforehand, training or hiring people that are kind and compassionate and genuine and all of those different things that are not related to the activity comes first, and then train them for the activity, rather than taking someone who's an expert in the activity and trying to turn them into a different person, because you don't change people like that. So so those are some things, and that's where also Wild, we can take completely new people and turn them into expert paddlers in 90 days. So so those, that idea of, that guy Jim Coffey said just hire great people, but they're lousy at guiding the raft down the river. Well, no, we want to have the combination of the two, but it's easier to start with the quality people, turn them into quality guides, than quality whitewater people, and then turn them, try to make them nicer,
So I just got a note that my headphone battery's dying, so I'm going to finish up here or lose this. I have a couple more questions really quick. I'll leave this one while I Google something for somebody else.
Hey, what's your take on creature crafts? To be honest, I'm certainly well aware of creature crafts. I haven't used them myself, so I can't give any specifics. But if it floats, I think it's awesome, and if you can run whitewater in it, it's even better. So one of the things that creature crafts remind me of is someone had this dream of a take of the unflippable, uncapsizable craft or whatever, that not too dissimilar to what in the heyday 25 or 30 years ago in Russia, they would make booblets, which are like giant tires and trees all joined together, and they would run this crazy whitewater. So I think that if people have a passion for a creature craft or something along those lines, I think it's awesome. And so that's why, for me, I love the fact that I'm fortunate enough to be able to paddle a kayak, be able to paddle an open canoe, a tripping canoe, guide a raft, paddle raft, row, that if it floats, it's cool. And if people are out there and having fun, I think that's probably what the most important thing is.
Cool. I love it. Mike just said, can you post a link? I just Googled wild rafting Esprit and got the website. So you can Google it.
Cool.
I guess I'll put the link here for anybody that wants it, but you could also just Google it and find this program. But here's the website right here.
Yeah, you can find it at whitewater.ca.
Yep, pretty straightforward. I'm gonna remove that, and well, that's it, Jim. Thank you so much. This is so cool. We used to do. It's funny, we talked about what gear is in your PFD, but we had so many great discussions about guiding, and I feel like maybe we can pick this up again and just go into guiding some more too sometime in the future. It's really a pleasure to talk to you about this stuff.
Well, it was great to be able to that you'd consider to have me on, Zach. I'm really pleased and honored, and love to come back if there's any other subject that you think of, or that any of your other listeners are like, hey, what about this specific thing about water rescue or about travel international? Keep me in mind. I'd love to come back on again.
Oh, I had a lot more questions about rescue on my list here while you were talking, but I feel another hour. So we'll have to do rescue another time. There's definitely some detail stuff I'd want to get into. And if anybody is watching this after the fact, just leave a comment down in the YouTube video and I'll forward on to Jim. And in between, being kayaking in the jungle, he'll hopefully get back to some of the questions on YouTube too. So that's it. Thanks again, Jim. And we'll see everybody hopefully next week. I think Barry's going to give a talk here pretty soon too. So we'll have Barry's going to do his leading sleep talk.
That'll be great. Well, thanks very much, Zach. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. Nos vemos from Mexico.